Good evening, good evening, good evening. My name is Kristen Nicole Mann, and I am on here on this lovely Friday evening to talk about spiritual abuse and religious trauma. These are heavy topics, so I may have to split this into a series, but I just wanted to come in a real unlikely fashion and not really formal, but to talk about what it did to me, spiritual abuse, and what religious trauma means, and how I have persevered on the other side. And so let's take it back, and I'll introduce myself formally. So again, my name is Kristen Nicole Mann. You can follow my channel, click subscribe. I'm going to start doing more videos. I'm still figuring this whole YouTube thing out, so just bear with me. But I am now a professional author, artist, and I educate students, children, and adults about art. So I am a visual artist, and I have published two books, children's books. And so I'm a real creative person. And with that being said, that always was I felt like that was always working against me in the church scene. I grew up with a Christian background, and I went to church with my family, and we served in churches, and that was part of our lives. And but on the flip side, in the home, my dad was an alcoholic. He wasn't abusive, but he was an alcoholic that would hide his drinking. So we would see him one way. Then after a couple hours, he would come back up from his man cave, a whole different person. And so very complex life, starting as a baby. Like, I don't remember him not drinking. He was, an alcoholic until he passed away in 2014. That's really actually why he passed away, because his liver, I think it's called liver cirrhosis, or somebody will correct me. But so we had the church life, and then we had that going on at home as a family. And so church, from what it seemed, it should have been a safe space, especially for a family going through addiction. And a couple of them were the churches that we went to, a couple of them were safe spaces, as far as it was an outlet to get away from what was going on at home. So I think, looking back, my mother was trying to really figure out how we can stay rooted and grounded in a place of worship, to keep us, just keep us in a healthy manner. I just look back now, and I'm like, my mom probably was trying to not let that be our reality as much. So we were really around a set of good people at one point within a church. And then um, we decided, my dad used to work for IBM, and they moved us to upstate New York, and we had a great church that we were a part of. And then it didn't go downhill until we moved back to Virginia. So my family was originally from Virginia, Northern Virginia, and we moved back when I was 11. And I'm 33 now. So we moved back from upstate New York after being there a couple years. And when we started to join the church scene in Virginia, it was really weird. It was a strong culture of competition. There was a strong culture of keeping up with the Joneses. There was a strong culture of um, just image. And my family was really authentic. So we weren't used to this whole culture of things. We were used to having like family like people at churches. But then it's like when we moved back to Virginia, we just couldn't find that. And meanwhile, my dad was still dealing with his alcoholism. But I just remember it being like some really like stuck up people, and even with the children's church, ministries that I was in, just because I was a child, I remember even that thick competition spirit in the children's church, and even in like just it was everywhere. And children follow their parents. Now that I know that, because I have a child, I'm like, that's what they were following. They were following their parents. And so this created a whole religious style of worship. Like I would see it was a total difference from when we moved from New York to down to Virginia. And so I experienced as a child my first encounter with religious type of people. And let me give religious means, let me give a definition, because when you have, I'm going to give my own definition. So religious, of course, means you follow a faith. But when I say religious style people, they think they're holier than thou. They kind of talk down to you. They don't think God talks to you. They think that God only talks to them. They know everything. You don't have to tell them anything about God because God talks to them all day. These were the kinds of people that we were running into. I noticed it as a child. So I was like, who are these people? And so with that being said, the strong competition spirit I encountered young, like I told you before, but it was really detrimental to my growth in faith, having a faith, because I didn't think I was ever good enough to have a faith. I didn't think I was ever good enough to experience God's love because this was like surrounding us. And I just thought people were always better than the family that I had. Um, I knew that I had a special anointing on my life, but no one ever activated it. So it was like my family, we would kind of just always be that family that would go home like, that was really weird. What did you experience this? And then, my dad was really like, outside of being an alcoholic, he really had strong discernment. So it was kind of like we could talk about these different things as a family, but then when we get around the other people, it's like we just we couldn't click with them. So with that, growing in these churches, we kind of bounced around a lot. We stayed at some longer than others, but I remember just growing into preteen stage, and like we moved back when I was 11. So I had a certain group of friends, I had a whole life, and then we moved away and everything shifted. So that was a hard transition for me. So going to a place of worship and not being able to express what I was feeling or have anyone relate, it was very hard because I was meeting new people at school, and then I had to meet new people at churches. So it was really weird time. And so growing into a teen, I really didn't understand who God was. I was part of the youth, but it wasn't like that moment. Like I really can't remember a moment that stood out to me. It was kind of like I was just going with the flow, like I was going with the motion. Like um it just wasn't a significance. Like there wasn't a mentor, there wasn't a person that kind of like really poured into me. And I know some other people now that they said they experienced the same thing. But I didn't really have like someone that poured into me that I was like, looking back, I'm like, yeah, they were my mentor, or yeah, they really taught me about who God was and how to have an authentic relationship with God. So again, it just that whole competition, religious, image based Christianity followed through all throughout this time. We're finding churches, and my mom would usually find our churches, and then it's like, it's that don't ask questions, just go to whatever church your parents changed to. And so we left this one particular church. My mom served at this one particular church, and I remember someone um, just was really nasty with words, and they came up against my mom, and my mom had to make a decision from her. I'm not going to tell her story, but she had to make a decision to leave this church. And so we left this church and we went to a Baptist church. So we left a non denominational church and went to a Baptist church. And it's like, that's a whole night and day. I don't have time to talk about that, but whole night and day. So you're getting used to one church and then you're transferring into a whole other denomination, and you're like, I'm a like teenager, but now I'm like on to the point where I'm like graduated high school, like all those things are happening. And I just wanted out. So I got out, I moved to North Carolina, called myself thinking, knowing that I had a life there and all these dreams and stuff. Wrong. So I ended up coming back, and moving in with some friends, but my mom was still attending this church. So I started going with her. I had my own car, started driving there, and I'm like really young. So let's see, how old am I? I'm like 18, 19, not 20 yet. So I'm 18, 19. I'm going through that gray period, and I'm moving really fast through my story, but I'm trying to get to the spiritual abuse and religious trauma part, which some of it I've already talked about. But I'm going to this church that my mom and my dad decided to go to. They're still going to this Baptist church. And so um the culture was like Baptist, very Baptist. And I'm there and I'm not really in the Lord like that. Like I always had a relationship with God. I always knew there was something special between me and God, but I just didn't value it. And then I didn't think God valued me. So I was just kind of like going through life at this point, and I was doing what I wanted when I wanted, and then I would be there on Sunday and then I would leave. And so I am going to try to tell the story the best way that I can without um disrespecting anybody. But there was a particular moment. This is when my spirit really got crushed. And this is when the trauma, and I would say I can pinpoint literally when the trauma pierced my soul. There was a particular minister there, and of course, he was, good looking. He was like young, around my age, but he was married. Um, and I just remember at the time that I went back to going to this church, he had got married, and it was just real, it was nothing. Like I didn't think nothing of it. And so as time went on, they got divorced, and he had his eyes set on talking to me. Now, this was shocking because I was like, you just got out of a marriage, so why would you want to talk to somebody right away? But being me, I'm like, he's a minister, so I'm just gonna go ahead and be okay with, you trust ministers. You learn growing up in church that ministers can do no wrong, pastors can do no wrong. But this was my first encounter with faulty, um, a faulty foundation in leadership. So, long story short, I ended up setting up this date with him. I went to his house. That's when everything went down, as far as he really only used me for his sexual desires, and that was it. So it was kind of like that happened, and then I'm like, what just happened, driving home? And I remember telling my best friend, like, I don't know, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right, this doesn't feel right. And she could tell you till this day that that phone call, she said I even sounded off. And I because I did. But it's so crazy that I was like out in the world, like I was doing what I wanted at the time. But then when I went that route, I was like, this something's off about this. And so um somehow it got out to everyone. Let me backtrack. I was contacted by someone we mutually met, we mutually knew, me and the minister, and they were like praising him up. So that added to like the idolization of ministers, pastors, all these things at the time. And so I didn't think nothing was wrong with seeing what this date was going to be like. I didn't know I was walking into what I was walking into. So when I didn't really want to go the route that he wanted to go, first of all, when I got there, I'm telling this really bad, but when I got there, it's coming back to me. When I got there, we were supposed to go out. We ended up, he ended up changing those plans, and I was like, what is going on? And so that's when everything went down. And it's like one of those moments where you're telling the person no, and then they're like stronger than you, and they kind of like push you back or use their force. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I just didn't even try to get out of this web at this moment. And so back to the phone call, I was like, I don't feel right. So it eventually got out to people. And I remember after that, I just was like so down and out. I was like, why? Like, I was beating myself up more, but I didn't understand at the time spiritual things. So I was like, just looking at it from real earth perspective, like low perspective, taking it personal, not saying no prayers, not talking to God. I just was down and out. So I remember one Sunday, um, I just felt like the scarlet letter. Like I was still attending church, but I felt like the scarlet letter. So I remember one Sunday they had an altar call. And mind you, his parents are the lead pastors of this church. So he's under them. But I remember how they had this altar call. I remember the message was really good. I guess it touched my soul or heart, and I was just sobbing. I was just so broken. So I went up there like the scarlet letter, and I remember his mom asking me what my name was. And at this point, we had been there a couple years. So I was like, whole like anger just took over. And she was like, I'm sorry, what's your name? And I was like, really? Really? So I kind of like stood there and I couldn't get it out of my mouth. And I remember just being so mad that I didn't even know whether I wanted to like, I'm telling you the real raw, I wanted to like punch her at that moment. But what I did was I just was like so mad that I started crying. And I was like, I told her my name. And then she did pray for me, but it wasn't like any connection. Like I felt like she was doing her job. And then it's like I never went back after that. Um My parents were kind of confused because they didn't know at the time. I didn't fully tell them what was going on. I just said I was violated against what I really wanted to do. And looking back, I know that I was labeled something that I wasn't. And it just disgusted me at the time. Like, I didn't have the articulation for it, but it disgusted me at the time. And so, after that happened, I was really broken. Like, my spirit was broke. Like, that was one of the lowest moments still that I've ever had in my life, because I'm like, how dare people, turn their back on me? And this is happening in a safe space. And then I have this person, this so-called minister, praying over people, preaching the word, and then he's like, find out he's doing this to like all the girls in the church. I just happen to be like 1% of the victims. And I'm just like, that's when I really started not hating the church, but I was like despising it. I was definitely like, I don't know if this thing is for me. So as time went on, um we joined another church, and it just didn't get any better. I'm gonna tell you, it just didn't get any better. Like I said, like the church has, any church that we've been in, it never had a person that wanted to genuinely pour into myself or my family. So we're just like church hopping at this point. And then I'm like, here we go again. And again, I didn't know the spiritual thing. So I'm not looking at it as anything. I'm just kind of like there. And so we went to this one particular church, and it was actually good. It was good when we first got there, until we started seeing a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I started seeing a whole bunch of witchcraft, and I was like, something ain't right. Something ain't right. But you know what? I'm gonna save that for part two, because I don't want to tell the whole story. This is gonna get really long because I have so many stories, and it's not to bash people, but spiritual abuse and religious trauma is real. And I want people to understand that you can heal from it. It's not of God. The people that the enemy used, they were set out to destroy people's lives. And you don't have to stay in the place that you're in. I want you to know your girl right here, she's been through some stuff in the church space, in the religious space. So you're not alone. You're not alone. You will make it on the other side if you are currently going through the process of doing the inner work with the Holy Spirit, God, and Jesus. Keep going, because it is so worth it. God has so much more for you. He loves you. He's not he doesn't want to hurt you. He doesn't want to hurt you as a son, or a daughter, because both, we men go through this too. So this is not just a woman thing, but men go through religious trauma and spiritual abuse as well. But the part two is, you gotta grab your popcorn, because I probably will get on tomorrow and talk about part two, because this place really turned stuff upside down. And I want to say, before, a tip of wisdom: don't think because you have moved on from a certain situation that you actually dealt with the situation. Don't think because you moved on from a certain situation that you've actually dealt with a certain situation. That's not always the case. So you want to be real careful of just moving forward without closing that door, which is something you'll learn in part two about me and how it affected me with this whole religious trauma and spiritual abuse. But I will talk to you all soon, and I hope you have a great Friday evening, and I'm out. Bye.